Right, so the decision now was to go back to medicine or continue with what I have started here, right, which is Toks Violin and Toks Violin method. This was one of the hardest times of my life because I had to start fending for myself. Was still going to school. There was no money coming back from Nigeria no more. I was now entirely on my own. Right, it did not settle in well with my parents when I told them I was leaving medicine to go do music full time. Hey guys, thank you very much for tuning in. This video is a little bit different because in this video I'm going to be sharing with you my entire story, how I picked up the violin, how I got to the Caribbean, how I left med school to do violin full time, how I almost got homeless in a strange country, all of that packed in this video right here. So make sure to watch it all the way to the end for the entire story. And before we go any further into it, I want to say a very big thank you to all of you that has been supporting my music on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. You've been very, very supportive. You've been sharing my music all over the place, and I really, really do appreciate that. So who is Toks Violin, or who is Samuel Toka? That's what we're going to be finding out in this video. Right, so we came to the Caribbean to study medicine on a state scholarship program from the Nigerian government. Me and a few other state scholars came here to study medicine. But before that, I had started the violin, although I wasn't good yet. I wasn't nowhere close to where we are today, but I want to take you through that story of how I started as well, what age I started. So let's take it back to how I picked up the violin. So growing up in Nigeria, I grew up in a Christian family. My mom always took us to church and all that, and I was part of the children's choir, right, where we sang. I didn't have the best of voices, but I think that was a good experience, and that was very, very important in my journey in terms of what's going to come after that. At some point around that time, I was around 12, 13 years old, and the church decided they were going to introduce the children choir to instruments, right? So some of the persons from the choir, I wasn't among them, right? Were sent to the city to learn about instruments in this program called Music Workshop. So I had a friend who went and he did the violin. Other persons did other instruments as well. It was a short program, nothing too long, just a couple of weeks to introduce them to how instruments work, how other aspects of music work, apart from singing. Right, so when they came back, they brought in different instruments. Wasn't plenty of instruments though. For example, there was just one violin as of that time, and this guy called Samuel, which was my friend, was the one playing that violin as of that time. Not really good yet still, because everybody was still learning at that point, just a couple of weeks of training. So I was fascinated by how the violin was looking and the sound it was producing, although it wasn't the best of sounds yet, because like I mentioned to you, he was just a complete beginner as well, and nothing that much to offer. But yes, in fact, I remember asking him, is this the smallest size? Because it was very, very small. For an instrument making that type of sound, you would think, okay, maybe this size is the baby size, but no, this is actually the adult size violins. However, we have smaller ones. So going back to that, I remember asking him whether that was the smallest size, and he said no, that was actually the adult violin. So from there, I started kind of trying it out, although I had no idea of what we were doing, until the choir decided that they would introduce more members of the choir to the instrument. But this time, we're not going to be going out to music workshop, but instead, persons that came back would be kind of guiding us. Right, so they were the ones guiding us through the first phase of the violin. I became so interested in the violin that I did not care that much about singing no more. That could be because I did not have the best of voices, and I now had an opportunity to learn something that I could use to express myself musically rather than having to sing. That was how I fell in love with the violin from the start. From there on, I started practicing over and over again. As of that time, we now had about three to four violins, but these were the church instruments, which most of the time you're not allowed to take home and stuff like that. So about a year or two, given my interest in the violin, I was like, it's time for me to get my own violin. So I told my mom I needed a violin. She thought I was joking. Right after a couple of times of reminding her, she finally decided she was going to let me get a violin. So I went out, I bought myself a violin, and from there on, my love for the violin grew even stronger, because every time I spent on the violin, I realized that paid off in some way. That improved my skill on the instrument. So I was kind of driven by the success I was getting from little practices. That made me practice even more. So fast forward to when I was about 17, 18. At this point, I would have played for about 4 years, but not 4 consistent years, because at some point I had to take a break. At some point I had to focus more on schoolwork. So moving on to getting that state scholarship to come to the Caribbean study medicine. So landing in St. Vincent, now I looked around and I was like, wow, where are we? Right? Because from where I'm coming from a much more populated country, when we got here, looked around, there's nobody on the road, the houses look very, very separate from each other and all that. It was a very drastic change in terms of food as well, because what we used to eat in Nigeria were no longer available. Just a few of them still available. So during that first couple of months of adapting to the new environment, we actually learned a lot. And in fact, after the first couple of weeks on the island, I wanted to go get a violin, right? Because I couldn't carry the violin I had here in St. Vincent. So I asked whether I could get a violin. To my greatest surprise, there was nowhere selling a violin. I was a little bit disappointed, right? Because this instrument that I've had all through my teens, with me in school and all that, I was not going to have it no more. So that did not set out right for me. So I decided I was going to order an instrument. So I ordered the violin. It took a couple of months to get here, but it finally did. And when it got here, I was one of the happiest medical students at that point. So at that point, although we were all focused on the task, which was getting our schoolwork done and making sure we're excellent medical students, because the thing is, if you're on a scholarship program, you want to make sure that you retain it. You want to make sure that you're making your country proud. So that was the ultimate goal. However, in my spare time, I was playing the violin, I was learning new songs, I was improving my skills, but nothing formal, like formal violin education, no, not yet. I was just doing it like a hobby at that point. About a year into med school, there has been a drastic change in the government that sent us here to study medicine. The government that was sponsoring everything, and this new government that was now seated did not want to continue with the program started by the previous government. Right, so we were in a very, very hard position because our sponsorship was now in danger. Not just in danger, in fact, they stopped sending us payments. So at this point, we had to start living by ourselves and from our parents' pocket. And you can kind of relate to how hard this would be, given that your parents did not prepare to send you abroad to study medicine. You got to go abroad to study medicine because you earned the scholarship, and now that load of funding your studies abroad has to be on your parents that are not in a very great financial position. So this was a very, very hard time, because for the next year, our house rent, our feeding and everything has to come from our parents, right? So our parents was able to do that for about a year, for the most part of that, but it wasn't so consistent. So the landlord was not taking it no more because we were owing a couple of months of rent, given that we were not able to meet up as much as the government that was sponsoring this scholarship would have done, right? So we're a couple of months behind, so it was a big loss to them. So they said that they would have to let us go. So at this point, they gave us about a month to start looking for what we plan to do, but we're not going to be living there no more after that month, right? So at this time, we're about 2 years into med school, and at this time I was already playing the violin for 2 churches every Sunday morning, right? Because that's how I was trained, right? Once you get to somewhere new, once you get to a new country, find the closest church that you find relatable, that makes sense to you, and join them. So that's what I did, right? I was playing for 2 churches every Sunday morning. I usually start one around 7, and then I start the other around 9:30. Good. This led to me becoming very close to the organist of one of the churches, right? So we kind of talked about what was happening, that our landlord was going to kick us out and all that, and he kind of and he mentioned to me that one of the churches I was playing for, they had one room somewhere on the other side of the church building that it's not been used in not a couple of years, about 10 years plus. It's not been used for that long. So he was like, if I ask the dean of the church probably I might get a chance to use that place, given that I play for the church every Sunday morning, and we're about to have nowhere to stay. So I was like, well, let me just take the risk, right? Let me just ask anyways. Whatever the place looks like, it doesn't matter to me. I just want a place to stay until we're back up on our feet again. So I asked, and in fact, they were a bit hesitant because the place was so out of use that you would not believe somebody could stay there. But I decided I was going to take it anyways at my own risk, right? So I started cleaning up the place before the due date for the other place we were living. Right, so made it a little bit reasonable, right? And the church was very, very helpful as well, because I had now become part of the church choir, part of the church musician. So they did a little bit of upgrade to the place, but no level of upgrade you do at that point can totally restore that place. So that would be my home for the next 2 years, and that would be where most of my work would be done for the next 2 years, evolving Toks Violin. This was now around 2017, about 2 years from the time we got here. We were still continuing medicine because the school was very, very lenient. They wanted us to finish the whole of basic sciences, because med school has two parts: the basic sciences, where you do the learning in class, learn all the things you need to learn, and then the clinical sciences, where you learn in the hospital by practicing as well, right? So they wanted us to finish all the basic science part, all the learning in class, right? And then after that, they would give us some time for our government, the new government, to take up the scholarship program and make those payments. So that was why the school let us continue to complete our basic sciences. So at this point, I was in this new place all by myself. There was no money coming from home no more, because they just couldn't afford it no more. They had tried to do it for that 1 year that the government was not sending anything, but that was all they could do. Given the currency disparity, it was very, very hard. This was one of the hardest times of my life, because I had to start fending for myself. Was still going to school. There was no money coming back from Nigeria no more. I was now entirely on my own. The fact that I wasn't paying rent no more was a very, very big relief, and I owe that debt to the church that let me stay there for that time. But yes, this was a very, very difficult time. Persons were very, very generous, especially the persons I play for. I usually get some donations from them. The persons I play violin for sometimes, right? So that kind of kept me going. So at this time, I started playing the violin a bit more serious, because this was the only thing that was kind of putting a little bit of food on the table for me at that point. It wasn't anything official. It was just playing for persons, and then persons would give some donations after that. So the violin kept me going through that very, very hard time. So I started respecting the violin even more. So after finishing basic sciences, usually persons will take a little break before they move on to the clinical sciences, and this is what the school wanted as well, for us to take a break so our government could meet up with the payments for us to continue to the next phase. So during this break, I think this was around late 2017, early 2018, right? During that break, I started playing the violin even more serious. There was this advert that came up that one of the persons from the school told me about. There's this woman, she's a very, very good musician, and she's looking for persons that play stringed instrument, that she wants to make something like a quartet. I was like, wow, look at me, this is for me, right? So I auditioned, right? And to my surprise, she said I was good, right? For me to be considered good, thinking about it now, for me to be considered good at that point, that's a huge compliment, right? So I auditioned, passed the audition, right? And was now part of a quartet. A quartet, like we had 2 violins. She used to play the cello. We had 3 violins actually, because we did not have anybody to play the viola, right? So we usually use the 3rd violin as a viola. This would go on to be the start of my professional training on the instrument. I decided I was going to start taking classes with her, given that I had completed basic sciences at this point and was on a little bit of break, right? So I started taking music classes from her, started redefining some of the things I had learned before, started discarding some of them that wasn't it at all, some of them that did not make sense. After a couple of months months playing with the quartet, she was like, Samuel, we're sending you for exams. I was like, which exams? Then I realized she was referring to the ABRSM exams. And I was like, me, violin exams? I've never done an exam in my life on the instrument before. I just loved playing. So I was like, why not? Let's do it anyways. So we started with all the things we need to know for the exams, the things we need to know for as musicians as well. So these were like one-to-one coaching sessions we had. So I had to still pay for these coaching sessions, which was still from the little coins I was making from playing with persons. So I decided I was going to invest that in my playing of the violin, my practice of the violin, right? So I took those classes. Fortunate enough, somebody was very, very happy to help sponsor my very first exam, and I'm still super grateful for them because those exams really helped me learn the things I needed to know. Wasn't really that much for the exams, was more of the things I needed to know to pass the exams. Those were the things that were really, really important. Right, so we started practicing non-stop. I remember I used to practice about 6 hours a day on the violin just to meet up with some of the materials I would have to cover before the exam. This kept me motivated. And I really, really enjoyed the progress I was making. So I decided to put in a little bit more. So I was doing this, I was researching, I was loading my head with everything violin, everything music out there that you could possibly think of. Also during this time I was teaching persons because I had already started teaching persons even from the very first year of med school, just teaching friends for free, right? Just to have the experience of teaching because I enjoyed teaching as well. Right, so I was still teaching persons, right? So everything I learn, everything I research, everything I discover, I usually teach it to my students back then. They were not really like students official, right? But persons I was teaching back then, right? And I started redefining the way I explain some things to them, a better way to put some things that would make them understand even better. Right, so in this process I started seeing what was out there, what the standard was, what is expected of violinists, and I started applying that to my students, the persons as I was teaching at that particular point. So everything I learned, like I mentioned, I was teaching it to them. Another very important part of this that happened that time was I had some friends who were leaving med school as well. They were leaving med school to go start their own businesses as well, which I'm happy to say they're very, very successful at this point, right? So they were helping me on the social media aspect of this, right? So they wanted me to take the whole thing online, which at starting off wasn't that easy for me, right? Because it was something new. So I started creating an online presence. I started posting on Facebook, posting on Instagram, posting on YouTube, started learning how to create content with their help and with some of the guides they did send to me. Right, so I started this, and this opened up my craft, my teaching and playing to the public, which means it was now open to public criticism and all of that, which was a very good thing, right? Because persons out there do not care at all. They'll let you know how it is, right? So I started learning from what's out there, the standard, how to make it even better. What I saw out there mostly when it comes to learning violin was you just go to class, and most of the time you just go through your exam pieces, and when it's time for exam you just play for the exam or write the written exam, and that's it. And after that you do not know how to play songs, you do not know how to entertain people, you do not know how to even have fun on the violin. So that's one thing I wanted to change with my method. So with this research, these years of putting all of this together, from classical training, from playing by ear, from playing popular song, I decided I was going to make my own system, which is going to teach persons how to play the instrument the right way, the classical technique, what you must do, and also how to play popular songs, how to play the songs that you want to play, right? So I decided to develop the Toks Violin method, right, which combines all of that. So it's no longer just that one way of playing exam materials, and when you're done with that, it's done for the day, and if somebody asks you to play something, you know nothing, right? So I started creating that and putting that out there on social media as well, with the help of these friends I'm talking about. Right, so after putting that out there for a couple of months, I started getting a little bit of traction. Persons from outside the country, persons abroad started reaching out that they would want me to have to coach them one-to-one on the violin. I was super excited because I needed at this point, given that I was fending for myself and I was all by myself at that point. Right, so I had a few online students at that point doing one-to-one coaching, right, and they were paying in a different currency. They were paying in USD, which made things much easier, right? So I could take care of myself a bit more now that I have a couple of online students. Right, so during this time we were still in that break. After that first phase of medicine, we're still in that break because the school wanted us to start payment before we continue to the next phase. So the break kind of extended like a year plus, right? So this was a good break for me, right? I would say without this break, there would be no Toks Violin or Toks Violin method or Heartstrings, which we're going to get to just now, right? So during this break, I did all that. I experimented with the methods I was creating with my online students as well. Started crafting, started eliminating what wasn't working, started putting together a curriculum. That is what we're using today at Heartstrings Violin Academy, which we're going to get to just now. Also around this time, I was getting a bit more social media presence locally here in the country, because persons have started seeing me on Facebook, on Instagram, and they've wanted me to play for them. So I was a little bit more well off than how I was like a year ago, and I was really enjoying this, playing for persons, teaching persons, and see them literally grow from the techniques and the method I was using with them. This got me fired up, right, and I wanted to know more, right? So I kept on digging, I kept on canceling out what wasn't working from the curriculum, adding the things that needed to be there, the classical techniques, what other world-class violinists are doing, to make sure that this is it when it comes to learning the violin, which is what has become the Heartstrings Violin Academy curriculum today. Somewhere around 2018, I met somebody very special, which is Kyra. Somebody I did not know existed, right? We clicked in so many ways. We were very common. We had a lot of things in common, a lot of things we liked about each other, and we started dating at that point, right? We would see each other on the weekends, because that was the only time we would have the space to do so. And we did this for over a year without missing a weekend. So it's the weekdays was like, okay, I work, like prepare for exams, prepare for school exams, train persons online, redefine the Toks Violin method, and then on the weekend we chill, right? That was how it was for me, right? And doing that over and over again, our bond grew stronger and stronger, which we're going to get to just now, right? But somewhere in 2019, the school called us back because they wanted to make some sort of arrangement, because they're already a little bit invested in us, given that they let us finish basic sciences even if we had not completed our payment, right? So this arrangement was something like, okay, they're going to let us finish the whole program and then we're going to pay back. For example, it was more like the school putting us on their own scholarship, but we would have to pay back, right, once we finish everything, right? So the decision now was to go back to medicine or continue with what I have started here, right, which is Toks Violin and Toks Violin method, redefining it and teaching it to other persons, and also performing as an artist. So the question was, should I go back to med school or should I do this, right? I loved both of them, to be honest. I was a good student at med school as well. I would not say I failed out of medicine. That's not the case, right? So, but for us to go back into medicine, we would have to take the exam we usually take at the end of basic sciences. We have to take that again to make sure that we're still medical students. We still know the information. Right, so prepared for that exam. But for me this time, I had already made up my mind that I was not going back to medicine, because I had asked myself this question, let's say 10 years from now, and you're an established medical doctor on one side, or you're an established artist with a method that helps thousands of persons on the other side, and you're called from your bed every morning to go to either of them. Which one would you go to? Would you go to see a patient in the hospital, which is going to be an established medical doctor, or at your own private practice? Or would you go to perform for some people or teach some persons how to play the violin? So this was what I had to decide. Right, so I made the decision that I was going to do this fully. Right? I did not want to be a medical doctor that plays the violin. I wanted to be a violinist, and I wanted to teach my method to other persons, because there was just one Toks Violin. However, my friends that were also in med school could do whatever I could have done as a medical doctor. It was a fantastic career, right? I would advise anybody to go into it. I still love it. I love the information. I do not have anything against it, right? But I was just different, right? I had something that was unique to me, which was Toks Violin and the Toks Violin method. So I decided I was going to go into this. Right, but for me to be content with myself that I really want to go into this and not running away from medicine, I decided I was going to take that exam again, to move that medical exam again, to move into the next phase. Right, but this time I'm just going to take it, and once I get that done, I'm going to go back to do what I want to do. Right, which was what I did. I took the exam, I passed, was ready to move on to the next phase of medicine. But no, that was not my decision. And I'd already made up my mind that I was going to do this, right? And I was going to do this full time. Right, it did not settle in well with my parents when I told them I was going, I was leaving medicine to go do music full time. But it took them a couple of years to come to terms with that, which I'm grateful they did at this point. Right, so I got that exam done, left that alone, focused on music completely. At this point, I've already done my 2 exams, one which I did in 2017, which was the theory exam, the ABRSM, the other one which I did in 2018, which was the grade 8 violin performance, which I both passed each of them. I'm gonna put something on here for you to see, right, with good grades, right? And after that, everything for me was streamlined, right, which was, this is it. Right, everything was like kind of on target for me. This is what we're doing, and there was no turning back from that for me. So because of this, I started to gain a little bit more attention locally as well. I started getting a few more gigs. I started getting a few more students in person as well, apart from the persons I already have online teaching. Right, so I had persons now that I was teaching directly that I can start using my methods with, and start kicking out what's not working even more and making it even better. So that continued all through 2019. All through it, me and Kyra, we were still very good together. We were meeting on the weekends every week. We did not miss a week for a year plus. Our bond grew so strong, we decided we were going to get married in 2019. At that time, I was around 23. She was just 20. We were very young for that decision anyways. But we just couldn't stay away from each other. So we got married in 2020, the first month. Right, and right after that, like about a month or so after that, COVID-19 became serious here locally, right? And it got so bad that it shut down everything that we had worked on in terms of in-person teaching and in-person performances. So now, COVID-19 has disrupted every source of income that was coming locally. So we had to find ways to make sure that we are still good. So we continue with what we had started, which was online tutoring, but we took it to another step even further. So this time, apart from just teaching persons online, with the help of my friends who helped me with social media, remember them? Right, so they helped me start to create courses. So instead of teaching persons, I started creating digital courses where persons could watch the videos and do violin stuff by themselves, play songs by themselves, and all that good stuff. So I was doing this. I was working as a sessions musician on Fiverr. I was playing online gigs because it's like the whole world moved online at that point. I was doing all of this at that point, and I'm happy for this because this helped me build a side of this business that wouldn't have been there if not for COVID. So during this time, because most of my online students were from the States, right, there was a need for me to register my business in the States, which is now Toks Violin Music LLC, which is registered in the States, so I could deal with those clients there comfortably. And this helped with selling my courses as well, my digital program and all those stuff. So I would say for me, COVID was more of a blessing in disguise, right? Because it let me redefine the way I teach as well. It helped me put my information in a way that I could give it to somebody and they could use it by themselves, which makes it even better when we have persons in person. Forward to 2021, with restrictions being lifted a little bit, but we still had a lot of them, right? I decided I was going to have a local base for my students, right? Not just for students online anymore, but I'm going to have students from St. Vincent, and where we can have our classes, we're going to have a studio. So I decided to rent a place, right, which is where we have Heartstrings Violin Academy at this point. I'm going to get to the reason why we changed that name to Heartstrings Violin Academy, and we did exactly that. So why did we decide to call it Heartstrings Violin Academy? Heartstrings stood out to me for many reasons, right? The first one being the definition of the word, being deepest emotion of love and compassion and all that, right? And the second one, thinking of the violin and music as the strings of the heart, right? And the third one, which might be a little far-fetched, but this is how I think about it. I've always wanted to be a medical doctor growing up. In fact, to be specific, a cardiothoracic surgeon, right, that would have eventually dealt with hearts and heartstrings moving forward. But since I had decided to do something different, why not create a theater where I would be dealing with heartstrings, but this time on the violin? Not just me and many other persons to come dealing with this instrument. So that brings us to where we are today, which is our very first concert, which is happening the 10th of December 2022. So you're going to be having me live with a band, and you're going to be having the whole of Heartstrings Academy, the persons that are here on the island. We have over 20 violinists that are going to be playing together on stage, and they're going to be representing at Heartstrings. This very first installment of Heartstrings is called Love Fiesta. So 10th of December is going to be all about love, expressing ourselves, showing love to one another on the violin. So if you know anybody that knows anybody, let them know that there's this Love in December thing happening 10th of December at Russell's Auditorium, which is called Heartstrings. You're going to have me with a live band. You're going to have other artists on board as well. You're going to have the whole of Heartstrings Violin Academy, 20 plus violinists right on stage, tugging at your heartstrings. Save that date, go mark it in your calendar so you do not forget it. So that is my story so far. That is where I am right now. And moving forward, let's say you ask me the question of 5 years from now, where do you think this would be? Heartstrings Violin Academy, and this method is going to be a dominant way of learning the violin, not just here in St. Vincent, but across the Caribbean and to the rest of the world as well, because we have international students as well. So 5 years from now, this is going to be the thing, right? So that is where I am at this point. Thank you if you're still watching all the way to this point. If you're still watching up all the way to this point, thank you very much. If this story inspired you, make sure to share with somebody, and I'm going to see you the 10th of December 2022 if you're in St. Vincent at Russell Auditorium at Heartstrings Love Fiesta. Thank you very much.